So good afternoon, everyone. It's May 5th, and thank you for joining us for our faith team meeting of Climate Crisis Policy and Earth Bill Network. Today, we're going to have a very jam-packed program. I want to take a little bit of time at the front end just to kind of go through what our agenda will be, and then we will get started. We have a lot to go through today. So first of all, the first part of our program will be, we're going to have a little musical interlude, and we're going to have conversation with William Morris from the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. And then we're pivoting into the discussion about clergy and working with clergy in our congregation. And Rashinda Fairhurst will be joining us for that part of it. Then we kind of will be moving again into another pivot into some of the nuts and bolts of why we're all here. And we'll be talking about clean energy standards. And Todd will walk us through some of the most recent things that are happening there. We have Aaron Lothus, an ecological theologian, who's going to also give us some inspirational words about that. We'll go also then move into some of those things that we can be doing immediately. There's a faith letter that we want to tell you about as a sign-on for our faith leaders, get you a little bit up to date on our Adopt the District Hunt program. And Peter will be talking about 501c3. Some of you have been very curious about what can we do or what maybe we shouldn't be doing as a 501c or congregations. And also we'll be talking about his experiences and work at the state level, state organizing. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Todd for just a couple of minutes. We'll frame things and we'll get going. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lavona, and thank you, everyone who works so tirelessly on all of this all the time to keep everything going. I'm very excited today because we're at a historical inflection point with the climate movement that has been decades in the making, and we'll dive into this more later in the meeting. But just so you know, we have the Earth Bill, which is very exciting and catching on with grassroots activists all over. And but there's also a push from the from the president himself and in Congress, and a full court press within the climate movement for a clean energy standard in the American Jobs Bill. So we're at this moment where decades of effort have led to fruition. If we can seize it and rise up and believe it and make it happen together, that's where all of us come in, and we'll be rallying that later today. But to open that and get us in the spirit, I want to welcome Gordon Michaels, a dear old friend and a performer who's been performing for many years, many decades, for every cause imaginable. And he's a cabaret artist in New York and Boston, and he's going to perform for us today. Welcome, Gordon. I'm so grateful you could be here. Please take it away.
Thank you so much. Just giving my little portion for Todd and for your organization of inspiration this afternoon. So can everyone hear me okay? Great. If you believe within your heart, you'll know that no one can change the path that you must go. Believe what you feel and know you're right, because the time will come around when you say it's yours. Believe you can go home. Believe you can float on air. Then say your prayers all the time. If you believe, then you right from the start. Believe you have dreams with all of your heart. Believe all these things, not because I told you to, but believe in yourself. You got to believe in yourself. Just believe in yourself. Then maybe I can believe in you too. God bless you.
Oh, thank you, Gordon. Thank you so much. You gave me goosebumps as always. And you remind me that our belief in ourselves is really the most powerful thing we have to manifest the world we want. So
God bless you. Have a great meeting.
thank you, Gordon. Thank you so much. Oh, well, that was lovely. Okay, now I forget what's next. So next up, we have a conversation with William Morris from Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. William, are you with us?
Yes, hi Todd, I'm here.
Great, welcome. So I think we can leave the screen on you for now, and it's so good to see you again. Thank you so much for being with us.
Of course, thank you for having me.
You're in a beautiful sunny spot. Wonderful. So welcome. William's going to tell us all about his exciting organizing and give us all sorts of inspiration and nitty-gritty advice about how to get this to happen at the local level. So welcome. Take it away, William, and then I'll ask you we'll chat a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So my name is William Morris. I am located just outside of Los Angeles, California. As you can see, it's beautiful and sunny here today. And I am on the steering committee with Young Evangelicals for Climate Action. So we are young Christians in the United States who are coming together and taking action to overcome the climate crisis as part of our Christian discipleship and witness. And so YECA, as it's called for short, is both community-oriented and action-focused. We're about coming together to unite our voices and collectively make a greater difference than we could make, on our own. And so just many diverse and creative actions focused on these three overarching goals that we have. First is mobilizing our generation of Christians. Young people already know what's going on with the climate crisis and care. It's oftentimes their congregations that are behind, and so helping to empower them. So the second part of that is influencing our senior Christian leaders who have the influence and the power and can help shift change within their congregations. And the last thing is holding our political leaders accountable. And so this is something we do across the United States. And specifically, I do here in my context in Los Angeles. And so I'll give a little background too on how I got started is I grew up going to church, but had never heard a sermon on caring for the earth or the climate crisis. And I ended up getting my degree in environmental science, but was still Christian and was trying to find some way and wrestling to get these two together. And it seemed like I was having a difficult time. And then I ran into YECA and other Christian conservation organizations like Orosha and found these communities of Christians doing incredible things because of their faith, not in spite of it when it comes to climate and environmental action. And so that is how I ended up where I'm at. And a couple of main things are reaching out to, my local churches and congregations as a young person of faith who cares about climate action and climate justice. And how do we act on our shared values in that, and also working with environmental orgs that exist and creating room for faith-based people in there as well. So that's a little background on me. Oh, Todd, you're muted.
You're muted.
Wonderful, William. Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit more about Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, like how many chapters, where are they located? What's that look like?
Right. So it's very much kind of decentralized and depends on where the person lives. So it's a network of about 20,000 right now altogether, and we have people all over the United States, depending on our different programs, whether it be steering committee members. We also have our climate fellows, which is our college fellows program, helping equip and empower and resource them to reach out to their college campuses and congregations. We also have another thing called the advocates program, where if you're a little older than that but want to be involved, and so it really really is just a very vast network that is far reaching. And so we're able to meet people exactly where they're at in their communities where they already, that they know and they love and they have influence in. And how do we help influence and resource them? So it can span from coast to coast.
Wonderful, wonderful. So walk us through, if you would. You've identified a church in your community and you've decided, so first of all, how did you identify them? And then how do you approach them? And now we're speaking to everybody here who might actually go through these steps with you. So go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Los Angeles is obviously very dense and urban. So I do have the good fortune of having, many churches within just a few mile radius that I've been to or have connection with. And so kind of just getting involved in like the Christian and faith community here, and that leads to me meeting people from specific churches. And so through them kind of go to this church, especially before COVID, when you're able to go in person, but just identifying young people there, or what are, who's already doing things in this congregation, who is a trusted messenger and in someone who is of influence in that community, and just kind of helping empower and work towards them. Everyone in their own congregations has their own needs, and they know those needs better than me, an outsider coming in. And so it's really working with the people there and kind of collaborating so we can turn it around and say, what is this congregation good at? What are their specialties? Everyone has their own gifts, including congregations. And what does this congregation want to do, and how can they influence their community?
Wonderful. So let's just break that down a little bit. So you've identified a group, you write them an email, you call them, you go knock on the door.
Right.
Let's break it to the very first step. How did you find the group, and what was your opening salvo?
Right. A lot of times I just show up on Sundays to churches. And I think there's something to be said for that physical presence, especially now that we're beginning to get COVID under control and places are meeting in person. If you're comfortable with that, I just, nothing can beat that physical presence sometimes, and showing up and saying, hey, I'm Christian and I care about this. What is your church doing? Or how do you do this? Or is there someone I should talk to? Do you know of someone else in this church who cares about this I could connect with? And so either showing up or, when it was more deeply in COVID time, sending an email, just getting a connection point, especially as a young person who really cares about this. They want to talk, or identifying the young people there who are, the churches are really trying to hang on to the young people and trying to listen to what they care about. And so that's the first thing I will do. And through those connections of either showing up or talking to the young people, getting another foot in the door. Hey, can we have a workshop? Can we have a climate crisis presentation? Can we do, can I talk to the elders, the pastors about this from this theological backing? How do we further this influence that we have?
And then when you want to talk about approaching legislators, how do you have that conversation? Because this seems to be a little bit of almost a divide where folks want to talk about issues, but then when it comes to the action part and really putting the pressure where it's going to matter to save our planet, it seems to be like there's this veil of unwillingness to go through that. And so how do you navigate that?
Yeah, there's definitely a gap. I think people really can care about things, but it can almost be scary or intimidating for them to reach out to these elected officials just because they've never done it before. And sometimes in a church context, some of them kind of shy away from anything political and they frame it as a bad thing. And so really what I've done is walk people through those first steps. Like we would have a workshop that's letter writing, to your elected official, like whose district are you in? Do you even know? Let's pull up a map. Let's find out for you. Let me help you through this process. What are these state, regional, or federal bills that are being passed, and how can you talk to your elected official through that? And so really it's a gentle hand-holding process of, I want to meet you where you're at and help push you a little bit because I know how to do this and let's teach you to do it. And I think once that initial veil of intimidation for them kind of goes away, it's like, oh, I did it. I feel like empowered and excited and can do this more. I think really just being gentle and helping them through those first steps has led to further, political action for these individuals that I've seen.
Wonderful. And one more question, and then Lavona can maybe give us a time of check on this. You mentioned that you were starting to network faith churches within a district together. How is that going, and how does that actually work? I mean, once you get 10 churches and you want them to start working together, how does that happen without you having to do everything?
Yeah, because that's a huge amount of work, right? But what I have found is a lot of these churches aren't these islands that I thought they were. There's many people, especially young people, who are connected with multiple churches because maybe one church isn't meeting all of their needs. So they go to one church for something, they're at another one for another program or something they have. And so there's a lot of people who know each other at these churches and kind of, I think, just being able to already use those connections that exist and not just create these new ones. It's especially easy when there are churches, part of denominations like Methodist churches around here where, oh, there's so many churches in this district locally, like how do we, you all know each other, so how do we get together and talk? And so it really is, I think for me, more about relationship than anything else, of building relationships with these people over time, and showing like, hey, I really care about like you and your congregation and your church and how we can respond to this crisis in this way. And so I think myself becoming like this personal connection point for people of like, oh, I know he does these things, like, and I know someone from this church you can talk to, like, let's all talk together and see how we can further things. So I think that nothing replaces, you know, that personal relationship.
And then last question, picking up one that Nancy Lawrence asked. And so this is amazing, of course, that we're all working at the grassroots level. There is hierarchy and leadership. And I know the faith community was deeply involved in comprehensive immigration reform, including the National Association of Evangelicals. So how do you navigate, or I know we talked about this and maybe you're just starting to navigate, but what do you think about the path up the chain of command, as it were, to get that leadership to also come from the top in the same way that you're bringing it from the bottom?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think sometimes that can be a problem where if you know, certain church leaders are a little more protective of their flock, they don't want someone outside coming in and trying to preach or do these things. And so I have found that reaching out to these young people and the people in the congregations who care, they are the ones who can reach out to their elders and their pastors about this issue. Since they've known them probably for a long time, they've been part of their congregation and part of their lives. It's a lot more of a trusted messenger than coming directly just from me, who has just shown up. And so working with those people who have been in those congregations and joining them and sitting down, you know, with their pastors, their leaders, their elders. And that way, there is this connection point and this relational point between the leaders and me and them. And that is how I have seen it be most effective, to reach out to these leaders who now I've seen some pastors who haven't talked about, you know, protecting creation before are having sermons on that, and, you know, just preaching or having worship songs about that and things like that. And so I think people underestimate how much say and influence members of the congregation who have been there can have as this trusted messenger.
Seems like we have another extra minute or so. So another question then. I want to ask a technical question, but I also want to ask you about the work in districts that are maybe a little less, a little harder to work in than LA. And you mentioned you have folks all over and that some of them encounter resistance. Can you just say a little word about how that plays out and what the tricks of getting around the resistance might be?
Yeah, definitely. It really depends where in the United States you are. I have colleagues and friends, you know, one who's in Tennessee who has a hard time. He can't even say climate change when he walks into a church because that's too hard for them. Or in Iowa, same thing. And so what they have shared and what I've also encountered is just using more, you know, familiar, you know, churchy words of just like creation care or protecting the environment, pollution, just these more general concepts that seem to have less political charge for some people. It means the exact same thing, but it's just trying to speak to people in language that they understand and they're comfortable with. And I think it really goes back to that trusted messenger thing again, because they've only ever heard climate change from people they may not agree with politically. So how do we enter in that as people of faith, as people who share these values, who know the language and the beliefs and the thoughts, and use that when we're connecting with them?
And now just back to a little technical question. And what is the specific ask when you go in? Do you want something put in the prayer bulletin? Do you want a sermon from the pulpit? How do you frame your ask to sort of, you know, handhold a little bit or to guide the next most immediate steps that you think could reach a broader audience? And is part of the strategy to build broader participation within the congregation in the climate group, or are you looking for just individuals to join your work? I'm sure it's a combination, but if you could just speak to that a little bit more again.
Yeah, I think the first ask is like, what in this congregation do you think would be the best fit for talking about this? Would it be like, is this pastor comfortable? I've preached like the sermon on Sunday if they were comfortable, and then other ones are only comfortable with like, oh, workshop, or let's do a small group first. And so really just asking where do you think this would be most effective in reaching at least a part of this congregation, so that they can get a feel for what this is and understand it better, and then we can expand. And so it's that first step, I think, is just that awareness raising. People a lot of these times in faith communities don't understand the severity of the climate crisis and how this connects to our faith. And so once you connect those dots, they already know. They're a lot more willing to do stuff. And so people in the church will begin to talk, and you can empower the individuals in the church to reach out to the congregation, who will reach out to their friends who already go there, who know these ministries and these committees and these pastors. And so really, it's inviting them to share into this work together to reach to their own church instead of trying to reach outside of the church and do reach places they might not know or care about as much.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, well, this is all very exciting and inspirational, of course, but I still come back to the idea that this is the responsibility of the leadership today, because we have a tiny window of opportunity, and now we have this opportunity of a major win to go to change how we create electricity, which is structural and fundamental. What can we do? And we're talking about maybe having a roundtable, but what can we do to like exponentially catapult from where we are now, that within a month we could have everybody pushing and supporting Biden and pushing Congress to pass a clean energy standard that's focused on renewable energy? How can we bring a higher level of folks together and, you know, really make a full court press together? Any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it really matters to reach out to groups whose minds you don't have to change or who don't need coaching. I would say that oftentimes as young people in these congregations, they understand, you know, the seriousness of this issue, and they're part of these congregations, and they can influence their leaders quickly versus having to maybe handhold and take a really long time to reach out and help change the mind of the elders or leaders themselves. And so what has been most successful for me in this has been reaching out to young people in all of these churches to influence their own leaders. And that really has been for me the best way to mobilize so far, is because I don't have to spend that time trying to get them to understand the importance. They understand the importance. This is their future, and this is their shared earth that we have to grow up on, and they've been taught to take care of it and the people on it. And so just holding their leaders accountable for that has worked really well.
Well, wonderful. It sounds like we're going to have to partner on convening the leaders to get them to go in all in with us. But I think we are in good shape in terms of the right messengers to bring that message. So, well, thank you so much, William. We're looking forward to continue this relationship and working together over the next several months. And it's just been wonderful to have you. Please feel free, of course, to stay around. And I'm going to hand it over then to Lavona to introduce our next speaker.
Great. And yes, thank you, William. And if you can hold on for a little bit, I know that you know Rashinda and Reverend Rashinda. And so maybe that we could actually connect some dots there. And Reverend Rashinda can maybe respond a little bit to what she heard from the standpoint of clergy, because that's kind of where we're pivoting now, is to, you know, how do we work, you know, in our congregation and with our faith leader, you know, in our house of worship. So Reverend Rashinda is, she's a United Methodist minister, and she's the organizing director for the Circle Faith Futures, and also a group called Faith for Future. By the way, I have put a link in the chat to the agenda with links and information for all of the presenters, so you can learn more about them. And so she's been, and Reverend Rashinda is also a climate reality leader, project leader, and she is also been involved in the early days too with this program on our faith team working group. And she's, I think what's really neat too about the work that she's doing with ministers and clergy is to, you know, help them navigate some of this space, and also the challenges that they face in their communities with the reality of what needs to be our adaptation and mitigation of the problems, and do they have the tools that they really need. So maybe what I'm hoping in the next section for our participants here, that they'll have come away also with some ideas about how to reach out to their clergy. And William, if you have some ideas about that, maybe we can start out. We have a couple extra minutes such that you could maybe either put a question to Reverend Rashinda or Reverend Rashinda based on what you heard, maybe ask William a question.
All right. So welcome, Rashinda. Go ahead and take it away.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen, and I have a kind of going to rocket through some information here because I think, you know, it helps to kind of get up to speed. Oh, and it's so good to see William, and it's so good.
Yeah.
Everything he said was just marvelous, especially, you know, listening for words like trusted messenger and, you know, how do we find our way into what can be a closed system or a sort of scarcity driven system or all that. So, but I'm going to jump in because our time is short and I got a few things here. So, okay, so how many hours must a pastor work to satisfy a congregation? Let's take a look at this. 14 hours, 18 hours for sermon prep, outreach, 10 hours, counseling, 10 hours, hospital and home visits, administrative functions. You can get the idea here. I love the way they use the word other at the bottom for 10 hours. Well, other could be a whole funeral or 2 funerals, which is a sermon and prayers and worship meetings. You could be up all night with the family at the end of life. I mean, the calls on the pastor's time just to satisfy everyday congregations is about 114 hours a week. So that's 7 16-hour days. And so this is why pastors struggle with this. This is pastors' everyday tension in their work life. So there's a lot of people who will step up to say, well, you're just whining, you should just suck it up, right? So this wonderful, helpful gentleman, Brian Jones, gives an example of his Monday morning as a pastor, where he rises at 3:50 in the morning to write a 4-hour sermon in a flurry of effort, and then he goes to gym for weightlifting, and that's the self-care portion apparently on Monday morning, and then he reads books and he exegetes books for upcomings. I mean, I think we can see that this is impossible, and it sets clergy up for burnout, frankly. So this is a paragraph from the New York Times in 2010. Members of the clergy now suffer from obesity, hypertension, and depression at higher rates than most Americans. In the last decade, their use of antidepressants has risen while their life expectancy has fallen, and many would leave the job if they could. So this is just a reality, a check on when you ask your pastor anything. 1,500. So there's a lot of conversation around these numbers. This isn't a monolith, but clergy leave the pastoral ministry every month, lots of them. 61, here, I'm going to draw attention to this one. 61% of congregations have forced a pastor to leave. Why? Well, maybe they talked about climate change. Maybe they talked about LGBT inclusion. Maybe they said something that the gentleman who has all the power in the church, even though he doesn't have an official position, it doesn't like. And so that pastor is forced out. It's a very vulnerable place to be in. 50% of ministers starting out will not last 5 years. So this is just some truth telling around what it's like to be a pastor. So there's really good stuff too. So why is anybody a pastor? Well, because it is such an amazing and wonderful job. It is crazy great and full of just the deepest gratitude and honor to be with people at end of life, to have your hand on the coffin as we say our final prayers and shepherd that person and their family through those last moments. There's nothing like it. It's an absolute miraculous job. But how does all that equal having time to talk about climate change? And so this is a poll. Basically, I'm going to ask you what your church and congregation or synagogue is like. If you want to launch that poll, Greg, and just see how many of us find that we hear about climate change in our faith communities. Not creation care. I want straight up climate change here, talking truth telling. You can fudge creation care if you want to, if you think you get into it good enough, for sure. But just remember that we're really wanting to tackle what's really going on and making some really clear conversations around this. And here we go. I can see that never that I can remember getting peopled. You know, this is, like I say, this is some truth telling. The truth will set you free. We figure out where we are. We can actually kind of make some charts in front of us to figure out where we want to be and how to get there. So these numbers too are coming from a group of people who have selected to be present today over Zoom because they care about climate. So this is likely to be far more likely to represent people who have heard of climate change in their community. So remember that as we look at these numbers. Okay, so I think, are we done with the poll?
Make sure that folks, if you need to use that little sidebar there to scroll down to see all of the results.
Yeah, so I'm going to end the polling and oh, it says share results. So let's do that. So this is you know, this gives us a benchmark of where we're starting. You know, almost 30% here have never heard the rabbi or imam or reverend even mention climate change, not even like in the bulletin, not even in the newsletter, right? So this is I think a pretty good snapshot of our reality. And I don't know, can this get put into the chat somehow, or this is so interesting. I hope there's a way to share this, or I would love to see this.
After the fact, it can be shared.
Okay, so I'm going to exit out of this, then I'm going to continue because we're going to talk about, so these are brand new numbers, 2021, and we have finally reached a point where 53%, a predominant number of Protestant pastors agree with the statement that global warming is real and man-made. African-American pastors are way ahead of Protestant pastors in general. Mainline pastors are ahead of evangelical pastors. You can see 75%, 71% to 39%. William mentioned Methodists. We have some of the highest numbers in the Methodist tradition. 80% of Methodist pastors believe in man-made climate change. Not believe in, I hate that phrase, but understand that man-made climate change is happening. And a majority of Protestant pastors, 54, have said the church has taken some tangible step to reduce their carbon footprint. And I want to just touch on, unfortunately, metrics are hard to find for anybody, but Protestant pastors, just because of the groups that measure these things. But we know that Christians are the least engaged by some of these other standards. So all these numbers are going to look better for Muslim communities and Jewish communities, Sikh communities, and Buddhists are shown to be the most engaged in climate change, and the religious aspect weighs against any other factors that would inform people's opinions. So here's, but this Rabbi Jenny Rosen from the Dayano community talks about how the Jewish community can do more, and most everybody feels this. And this is the Mizan Charter is being developed at the UNEP, the environmental program, and it basically, Muslims are more likely to understand that climate change is happening than Protestant Christians in the US, but there's still a lot of gaps in terms of teaching. Why should we care about that? And putting together sort of a teaching document for the Islamic community. So let's return to the 53% of pastors agree with the statement that global warming is real and man-made. It's so low, but let's celebrate that it's over the 50%. This is the number for the congregation, right? So pastors are still ahead of their congregants. And here's something too. Yale Climate reports that, okay, I looked at my own Oregon County, and this is really typical for across the country. 77%, and this is regular people, so church people will skew less, right? Think that climate change is happening, and that that's not necessarily man-made, but it's happening. 25% think that we should hear about it even once a week. So you have a pastor who's got so many calls on their time. They have pressure from congregants. You better not make us feel uncomfortable on Sunday. And 25% or fewer want to talk about it at all. So that puts pastors in a tremendous bind. What do we do? Oh my gosh, what do we do, right? Because, you know, it's not over. First of all, we all want to be here in 10 years, and there's lots of things we can do. One thing is just layering in. So if you're going to write a sermon, right, which is about an hour a minute, realistically, for those of us who don't do it in a flurry, you can write about climate, and it's the same number of hours as writing about the Beatitudes without, and all of the Bible has climate in it. All of the Bible takes place in a physical, natural world environment. So you can actually add that into every sermon, right? Support and permission from church councils cannot be understated here. You can be fired for talking about climate change. So if you have support from your church council, you can do a lot more. If you have permission and support from your denominational structures, so that you step out and you talk about climate change, and Harold and Ethel are super mad about that and they go up the chain to your bishop, right? You don't get moved the next year. This is a reality for pastors. This is really, and they have families too they have to worry about. A strong environmental team within the church. This is the true solution. As much as we work to educate pastors, as much as we work to ensure that they're getting structural support, both from the above and from within the power structure of the church, that there is a green team in the church that is doing that work, so the pastor can support their efforts, can triangulate, especially if these people are young. And they might still not work. I mean, we all know the story of the youth group that painted the youth room, and all heck broke loose in the church after that. And young people and families left because it was so painful for them. So we all know those stories, but let's hang in there. Let's talk about this. Let's spread the love, right? Because there's so much love in creation, right? So hold on to that. But green team, green team, green team. I really think that's a huge way forward. So here's our second poll and our last poll. And this is more to look at. So Greg, I don't know if you can launch this one, to look at sort of what we're doing in the church. So this is about, not so much about what we've heard in the church from others, but what we're doing ourselves.
Rashonda, I had those questions as part of the original poll, so we could
I'm
relaunch.
sorry. Oh, did you already launch all of them? That's fine. We can just talk about the green team. Yeah. Okay. So if one of the things that I wanted us to notice on this poll when we did it is that we'll have a green team, but we're all still using plastic utensils in the fellowship hall, and we're all still drinking out of styrofoam cups. So this is something to remember, is that we really need to be, oh, Greg, you're amazing. We all need to, yes, here we go. So half of us are still using those plastics in the fellowship hall. And yes, we're 63% of us have talked about creating native habitat for birds and insects on the churchyard. That's fantastic. That's the best looking poll I ever saw on that. That's wonderful. So things are changing, right? That's absolutely wonderful news. This is my plug for the Climate Cafe for clergy and faith leaders at Faiths for Future, which William is part of. So excited. So yeah, that's my spiel. And I know we went through really fast, but a lot of it is information that we're just underlining because we kind of know this, but we're just kind of doing some truth telling to underscore it. William, I had a question. So what can happen is the young people get together and they are incredibly trusted messengers, right? They are loved and beloved within the church, but they talk about climate change and then they leave because they're so disheartened that the church won't even listen to them. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. What could be some strategies for that?
Yeah, Rashonda. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. As well. And I meet so many people like that before COVID at these climate rallies, especially in downtown LA, where I talk to people and they're like, oh, I used to go to church. But, I spoke up about climate change and they didn't do anything, or they told me I was wrong. And so I left. And so it's just these multiple heartbreaking stories of young people feeling like they have no other option. But, this place they grew up in taught them to care, and then told them, what they cared about wasn't the right things. And so I think with that, and a question that was ruminated in my mind that I wanted to ask was just about how to approach clergy in as a young person in getting leadership roles for young people in the churches, so that they have some sort of capacity in the church. Because I find that young people or the church leadership will talk to young people because they feel like they're not being heard, and they listen to the young people, and then they won't listen to them or do anything they suggest, and they say, we listen to our young people. And so it can be really frustrating and almost gaslighting. And so how do we approach church leadership to create things like youth elder boards or things like that, where the youth actually get like voting power or say or something, so that they feel like they have agency within their own congregations? I think that twofold works in response to your question as well. I would say that would be a very good way to do it. But I wonder, what is the best way to approach the clergy and leadership in getting that done?
So first of all, if they're Methodist, you can just hold them to the discipline. The discipline says that young people are to be on the church council, period. So that's one thing you can triangulate with that. If you are not in a Methodist church, your church will still have rules about who's on the church council, you know, who is that council of elders. And I would say that it needs to reflect young people. And I would say that you start there, and then you're triangulating, right? You're not the pest that shows up and bothers the pastor when they're, you know, on hour 113 that week, right? So you're triangulating, and you can start triangulating with other elders. Hey, wait a second, we haven't had a young person, we haven't had anybody under 30. So our discipline even says like young people, youths. So that's like under 18. So so I would triangulate, look at what the rules are in your church for who serves on the church council. And if it does not have a robust representation of young people, that's, I would say, hold your elders to account for that. Show up at the church council meetings and ask why this isn't happening. Because yeah, there are always in a church about 3 people who hold all the cards. Sometimes it's the pastor, usually not. And so the pastor could probably use your help in triangulating this stuff, right? Because if they put themselves in the vice, they're fired. So that doesn't help. But they would love to triangulate with you.
Well, you know, this has been incredibly informative, inspiring, and motivating. And I just think it's wonderful. And I guess as we forge ahead, giving the time frame that we have, a window of opportunity, I think not just on the call, I meant like for Congress this year, think about focusing on the like-minded. Let's collect the like-minded and find those folks to unite with. And I think there are enough ready, willing, able folks. If we could all get on the same wavelength and working in a coordinated way, we would have the power that's going to be outcome determinative. So given that we're in a showdown, so to speak, on this, I encourage us all to focus in that way and think really about, more importantly now, how are we going to unite the folks that we already know that are in this with us, and how are we going to work as one? So anyway, thank you all so much. This is to be continued, obviously, and we got a lot to do in the next few months, but this is brilliant, and it's inspirational and provides a lot of hope, I think, that we have such wonderful people working on this everywhere. Thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you both. Okay, Todd,
lost
over
track
to
of
you.
time, Lavona. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yes, over to you now. And Todd will talk for about 8 minutes or so about, we're going to pivot now, make this big pivot over into the clean energy standards. You know, talk about some of the legislative part of this. And also then we will be joined by Aaron Loths, our eco-theologian, who will also speak to this issue. Thank you. And you have about 8 minutes.
Thank you. Please let me know if I run out of time. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is the Earth Bill. I've been involved in various movements: the Equality Act, comprehensive immigration reform, brownfield revitalization. Movements have a legislative demand when they're really focused and ready for results. And it's been a long journey in the climate movement to find something that would fit that criteria, and that it's a solution to the problem, that it calls the question politically, that it's understandable and teachable to the masses, and that it's a demand that's powerful enough to inspire uncommon valor and people really putting themselves on the line for the victory. And so the Earth Bill really captures all of those ingredients in one idea. And so, as just a refresher, it's 100% renewable electricity by 2030, which would require all utility companies nationwide to procure wind, solar, geothermal, tidal, or wave, and it includes existing hydro. So renewable electricity is the first one. The second one is electric vehicles by 2030. That's new car sales. And that requirement would be put on car manufacturers. And the third one is regenerative agriculture by 2030 by what we call big ag, what we've defined big ag as the major corporations who control the farmers and the decision makers on the ground. And these three elements together could achieve 80% of the pollution solution. And they would be structural, and they would fundamentally change the trajectory that we're on, which is now an upward slope still of greenhouse gas production. And this would really stop that in its tracks. It's our pollution over the next decade, and therefore our decisions right now to pivot away from fossil fuels that will become outcome determinative for the history of our planet. In the next 10 years, we will put enough pollution, our own pollution from our electricity, cars, and food production into the air that we will lock in 1.5 degrees warming. And from 1.5 to 2 degrees, multiple tipping points come into play, which then set off domino impacts of their own. And this could be an irreversible path. And the results we understand are traumatic. So it's imperative that we call the question and that we have a demand for a mass movement. And so we've launched the Earth Bill idea. People are already reaching out to their Congress people. I'm going to put an email in the chat for you to go ahead and write them about it. We have over 150 activists from dozens of groups across the country who have taken the pledge for the Earth Bill. And we have about 25 organizations already, and it's only been about a week or so. We have a brand new website. And please, Lavona, let me know how much time I have. We have a brand new website. I'll just show you a peek of it.
3 more minutes.
Okay, thank you. Here's a peek of the brand new website, earthbill.org. It's going to have the requirements there, information on it. It has the pledges here. It's going to have all the groups that listed it. Get informed, has a lot more information, and then join the network, more information. And all your names will be listed at the bottom. Everyone who took it, all the details and materials you need. So that's the Earth Bill Network. Now, our top line demand, as I said, was 100% renewable energy. There is a full court press for something called a clean energy standard. President Biden has committed to putting this in law in the American Jobs Act, and his goal is 80% by 2030. So we're in the ballpark. There are 2 major coalitions. One's called the Clean Energy Standard Coalition, which has Sierra Club and EDF and all sorts of think tanks, and everybody's in that group, and we're there as well. And then there's U.S. Climate Action Network, which is about 200 organizations. Everyone's getting ready to mobilize for this because we have a window of opportunity, May and June. And then by July 4th, the House plans to have its American Jobs Bill done and out to the Senate. So this is our first magical window of opportunity to save our planet with a real binding legal requirement on utilities to transition. There's a big debate about what clean energy means, as you might imagine, that's been going on forever and is still not resolved. There are about 4 different proposals on this in circulation and maybe a 5th in the making. Just briefly, they tend to focus on emissions. They're trying to focus on emission standards. And where they put that, it's a metric ton per kilowatt hour analysis. I know it's too scientific now, but these things are going to be outcome determinative in terms of whether gas is included or not included, whether various solutions that are called false solutions are included or not. And this debate and this conversation about what constitutes clean energy for our federal law, setting the standard for the world, is unfolding right now. And there will be no more important conversation in the history of humanity than this, in my opinion. And so it's up to us to all get educated, engaged, and to join these coalitions or to participate via our coalition in this conversation and get ready to really push. And our ask would be that you push for the Earth Bill definition, which is technology-based, wind, solar, geothermal, tidal, and wave, as a counterbalance, at least, to the resistance from the opposition of the oil industries, which is now ratcheting up. We're being told in Congress that they're not hearing from the climate movement, they're hearing from the opposition. So this is that moment And if we believe and we act on our beliefs, we could change history and save our planet. So I'm just hoping everybody is ready to jump in, and we'll continue this conversation, of course, in this forum and then our other forums. And so with that, I think I'll stop and see if I'm on time, or Lavona.
Yes. You were ready to move on to the next person who will give us a little inspiration on actually on this topic. So I'd like to have Aaron Lothus spotlighted, and there we go. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be with you. Thank you so much for the tremendous work that's happening. It's an honor to join this conversation and speak about energy ethics.
Right.
I would love
Should I introduce you a little bit, or could you introduce? Would you like to just explain your give your own little bit of bio there, background for people, or I can do that for you?
Sure. I'm happy to. I'm an environmental theologian. I have worked with interfaith and Catholic environmental coalitions on environmental advocacy and divestment actions since about 2003. I've researched faith-based environmentalism and what are the factors that makes it successful or challenging. And that's in my book, Inspired Sustainability, Planting Seeds for Action. I'm currently working for the Global Catholic Climate Movement on their program to support eco-spiritual advocates and volunteers following the inspiration of Pope Francis's Laudato Si. And another area of my research has been energy ethics. So I'm speaking to that today. And I'd like to approach it from two different ways. I think that as faith leaders, we share obviously an ethical commitment with all of our colleagues and compatriots in this struggle. This is clearly an ethical battle because energy issues are ethical issues. They impact people, they impact living creatures, they impact ecosystems, and they impact the future. And for all of those reasons, energy issues and environmental issues more broadly are ethical issues. And we share those ethical concerns with many people, those who are faith leaders and those who are not. But as faith leaders, we bring certain traditions and inspirations from our communities that I think can enliven our work. And I'd like to just share a few thoughts about that by sharing my screen here. First of all, our work is based in reality. We take a hard, sober look at the facts of the situation. And the facts of the situation is that with all of the potential carbon dioxide in global oil and gas reserves, we have an enormous amount of carbon dioxide yet to be released into the atmosphere. Unless we keep ourselves to a very strict carbon budget, which means we would stop using fossil fuels in 2025. A much slower taper down would take us to 2050. But this is an extraordinary time of urgency. And so all of your work is so important. Now, speaking from my tradition, as a scholar, I have worked with many interfaith coalitions, but also looked at the Catholic writings. And we see a fascinating development in that Vatican authors, Vatican commissions are publishing on the question of energy as a moral topic. This is something that needs to be celebrated, not only in Laudato Si, which teaches us that there is an urgent need to develop policies to limit emissions and substitute for fossil fuels. Now, you all know that. We need to make sure that all our pastors and congregants know that and know that it's coming from the top. And furthermore, in this document called Energy, Justice, and Peace, there's been reflection on the specific duties of advanced countries to erase our ecological debt, or at least to work in some way towards ameliorating our ecological debt towards developing nations by using renewable energy, by accelerating this transition. by developing the use of the most complex and capital-intensive energy technologies so that in justice, poor countries can feed their development. And hopefully they'll do so using renewable technologies that we share with them. But there's another meaning to our communities. And I think this is something we all need to reflect on, as I know has been a topic of your conversations. We need the support of each other. This is a hard battle. It's not easy. And we need to benefit from our faith communities, which renew our own personal energy. There's something powerful to the fact that faith communities have a moral orientation. They're willing to examine and change behaviors. This is part of our ritual practice, part of our prayer practice. New ideas can circulate within a faith congregation. This is what we call the diffusion of norms. And then working together, we find the companionship and encouragement of friends. Furthermore, we have these transcendent gifts, the inspiration of hope, the virtue of persistence, and the power of prayer to support us as we continue along this hard work that is so intense at this present moment. So I would leave you with two questions to take home, because I think as people of faith, we have a deep faith story that is deeply intertwined with our climate story, with our ecological story, who we are at the center of our being, and how our narrative within our faith community, within our faith identity, connects to our love of nature, our sense of climate justice. And so I ask you to think about what invitations to eco-spirituality, energy ethics, and justice most appeal to you. Where is your burning fire, and how could we get in touch with that? So that's another way of asking, which of your personal and faith values most connect with your commitment to these actions? Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much. That was really wonderful. In fact, I'd like for us to just take a minute to reflect on those questions, quiet time. And we will be breaking into groups soon and have opportunity for some discussion about some of the things that directions that we want to take and work that we want to need to move forward on. But I think that's so powerful. I mean, this is the faith team. And so, what these values are very important, to us in terms of what we do going forward. So why don't we just take, a quick minute and think about what we've heard. All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your joining us. Nancy, would you be able to change the spotlight?
Before Erin goes, I was wondering just if I could ask her real quickly.
Okay.
Do you see the leadership at the highest levels interested in the legislative focus in the United States?
The highest levels of what? I'm sorry.
At the the upper echelon of the leadership of faith communities. I guess the question is more, how do we get them more engaged? They worked on comprehensive immigration reform with gusto. How do we get that same level of commitment to the climate? And I know there hasn't been federal legislation to cue that up, like comprehensive immigration reform. But now we have this clean energy standard motion and movement. Do you think we could engage them at that level and get them interested? I talked to the National Association of Evangelicals, and it didn't seem like they're quite ready yet. And now's the moment. So I just wonder if you have any thoughts of that.
Well, I think that there are so many groups in this field. I mean, there is the Evangelical Environmental Network. That group is already in the camp. There's the Young Climate Evangelicals. So it depends which group you go to. You will find some that are already on your side and some that have a longer distance to travel. And then there are some that have that are a mixed group within the same community. I think that I would agree with Rashenda that to show that we as the community want to see this action, that we perceive a powerful moral call, that we are driven to this as an expression of our faith, that we see this as necessary to take care of future generations, God's creation, however we envision that, however we express that, and the poor who are suffering. I think the more that our leaders hear from us, exactly as you're doing on the legislative level, it needs to take place within the faith level, because I think it's a relatively new problem to faith leaders. Few of them have been educated on climate in seminary. They were not taught this was their job. So I think it's up to us if we want to see it done to show up and say, no, this is the moral issue of our generation. We want to move, and please join us.
All right, thank you. Wonderful. I look forward to working with you on that front.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, everybody.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Great. Okay. So we're gonna let's see, Reverend Terry Ellen. I think you are with us, actually. Thought maybe you wouldn't be able to join us for this. So we're going to talk next about a faith letter, a sign-on letter. And let's see, I guess I need to do the spotlight now.
Nancy, were you going to do that?
I think you were going to take the lead. She was she's there to back you up. So let me.
And then while Lavona's doing that, Terry, if you could just talk a little bit about the letter, and I'm going to post it here. We have the draft ready to go, but then also what it feels like and how you respond to these kinds of requests that you receive, and how folks might navigate those conversations with their faith leader. That would be great.
Well, if I can make a little side comment just about what we just heard, is that almost every faith tradition, every single one, usually they have absolutely gorgeous statements about caring for God's creation, about the environment, et cetera, et cetera. The statements are there so that anybody going to their pastors or anybody up the chain have statements already from those very traditions themselves. And I mean, one of the things we can do is maybe I know there are collections of those. We could bring them together, because that's a great resource to have. As we learned from William and Richenda, if it comes from within the tradition, it's the most powerful thing there is. Look, we're simply, in terms of this urgent situation that Todd has told us about, as well as the IPCC has told us about, we know we're in a real crunch time here, and it is one of great possibility. So we have just written, we're in the process of putting it together. We have a draft letter to clergy asking them for basically to support the Earth Bill, which Todd has been talking about and which you now have the website for. But particularly what we have to do is change it a bit to focus particularly on these energy standards that is coming up and is going to be enacted in law by July 4th. So we've just got these 2 months to have whatever input the faith community has in that process to put whatever kind of moral suasion we can find behind that. And that will mean going to pastors. That will mean talking to people in our faith communities to try to urge the Biden administration to actually act courageously in the face of all the kind of pushback they're going to get from the various huge corporations. I guess that's, I think that's enough to say.
Yeah, I think we'll need to wrap it up on that note. We're starting to fall a little bit behind on our schedule. So thank you, Terry. And that that letter will be something that'll be ready to launch very soon. And that'll be an ask that we have of the faith community. And so we can maybe circle back at the end of the meeting if we have time about some action steps on that. So thank you very much, Terry. Let's see, I think I have to spotlight myself. I'm doing both now. The person that was handling this earlier has left, and let me see.
I can help, Lavona.
Oh, can you? Thank you. So
just-
actually, we're going to bring up Peter now, or Nance. Yeah, why don't we bring up Peter now? And Peter, are you there? Let's see.
I am here.
There we go. We're going to have you. I'm going to add spotlight. I think we got you there. Very good. And let's see. Remove spotlight over there. Okay. So Peter, hi, welcome. And you're in Oregon. And I want to just introduce yourself real quickly. And I just want to mention too that Peter, among a number of people, is also on our faith team working group. And thank you very much for your work. And he's going to be talking about two things very quickly. And we may have to ask your indulgence, everyone, because we would really like to get into breakout groups for at least 10 minutes. But he will be talking very briefly about 501c3 as well as some of the state networking. Thanks.
And good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to try and do this together as a story. So my name is Peter Sergienko. I'm an Episcopalian. I'm a member of St. Michael and All Angels Episcopal Church in Portland. And I'm a board member of Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, which is a statewide organization that does both Christian and interfaith work. It extends well beyond climate and environmental matters, but for the purposes of this, I'm just going to talk about climate. So St. Michael's is one of those ideal churches that Rashenda and William were talking about earlier. We are a Green Faith certified congregation. We have solar panels on our south-facing sanctuary roof. We don't use any toxics in our cleaning or in our landscaping. Our clergy are supportive of us, and we are a lay empowered congregation. So in that sense, the lay people doing this work tend to make it easier for the clergy. And that's developed through trust and long lasting relationships, and the clergy having confidence in the laity that we're not going to go off and do anything crazy without checking in first. So in St. Michael's context, we've had advocacy action for less time than we've had agreed to, but we've done advocacy work for about 10 years. We have taken positions on state ballot measures, and we have regularly contacted our state and federal representatives on matters of policy. We have a action every first Sunday of the month. That's usually some sort of sign-on petition or letter or policy statement. So we are a culture of advocacy and engagement with public policy. So St. Michael's is a 501c3 as a church, right? And so you may be wondering about lobbying and whether all this stuff that we do somehow gets us in trouble with the IRS. It does not. And there are a lot of reasons why it does not. To be regulated and to put your exempt status at risk, lobbying has to become a substantial part of your activities. And that sort of comes down to a lot of different things, and it's not a bright line test. But you have to spend money on it. You have to spend staff time on it. You have to spend resources on it. And if you look at most parish budgets or church budgets or faith community budgets, there's no line item for advocacy or for lobbying or any of those things. We're not spending any money on it. It's purely volunteer. So we meet the IRS limitations, even though we do all that work. And again, there's a difference between doing that work as St. Michael's as a church and us as individuals. And sometimes we're doing it as individuals and sometimes we're doing it as a church. So when we're doing it as a church, we follow our process for making that decision. So we would bring the information to what we call our vestry, which could be your church council or other board of directors. And we say, we would like to take this position on this particular piece of legislation, this ballot measure, whatever it is. And the vestry will take that under consideration and then make a legal decision for the congregation to do it or not. And once they do it, then we're acting as a congregation, then we're an organization that is engaged in lobbying. If we don't have that, we can still take positions as individual church members, but we're not acting for St. Michael's, and we shouldn't hold ourselves out as acting for St. Michael's. And just know that your own tradition may be different. There are traditions where, in fact, the priest or the pastor or the faith leader alone is the sole decider of those things. And so just know what your tradition is and follow that. So for Ecumenical Ministries of Oregon, we've been organizing the faith community around the state.
Okay, about 1 minute.
Yep, for a year or more, well, for several years, but in the past year for a clean energy standard at the state level. We just finished a week of lobbying, but Rashinda was part of that. I was part of that. I think there's other people in Oregon that are on this call that maybe have been part of that too. But that's lobbying for an organization. And EMO is large enough that it has a paid public policy director. It has a creation justice advocate who's paid. And so we at EMO use something called the expenditure test to show that we're not engaged in prohibited lobbying because we are a 501c3. And basically it's, if you're less than 20% of your budget, you're going to be fine. We spend about 1% of our budget, 2% of our budget on lobbying at EMO, so we're way below it, and we don't really have to worry about it that much. It's very detailed. I'm not giving legal advice. I am a lawyer, but I do have a one-pager. I can share it, or I can show you by sharing screen, I think. So I'm going to do that. But I'll give this to Lavona so she can send it around too for those who want to read it. Oh, and it doesn't look like I can share screen, so that's fine too.
That's wonderful. Well, Peter, I put it in the Boulder Advocacy 501c3 guidance document, a PDF, in the chat, along with other things. Lavona, are we going to have Nancy talk, just say hello briefly about the adopted district?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Peter, for everything.
Thanks. And Nancy, I'm going to spotlight you in a moment as soon as I find you. You can start talking if you want. Nancy, are you there?
You're on mute.
Okay, there we go. So I'm part of an organization that we formed for a steering committee of about 12 people. We belong to different parishes. So we do work in our particular parishes and then coordinate once a month just to touch base and share what we're doing. We kind of looked at different organizations that are doing policy work and decided to go with the climate crisis policy, partly because they have two lenses that we liked a lot in choosing which bills to support. And one is that there are measurable results in reducing fossil fuel emissions. That's one. And the other one is environmental justice. So we got on board and two of us organized a webinar, and this was kind of a launching pad for getting people involved. It was a webinar designed for Catholics, and it involved 4 parts. One was an introduction to Catholic social teaching. Why would we have moral and faith engagement in policy issues? The second one was a context of the legislative scene in Washington, D.C. that was given by Jim Walsh of Food and Water Watch. The third segment was Todd with just explaining everything about the climate crisis policy and Earth Build Network. And the fourth was a very good speaker on how to lobby. We took that list, 3 of us afterwards, took that list of people who had registered, and we had their zip codes and we had their email addresses. And so I made an Excel spreadsheet on which districts did people belong to, and then tried to form them into teams, and also worked with the state, the New York State organizer for this, Sarah Gronum. So we've been able to get some really good teams working on the ground with getting appointments with their legislators. And it turns out that when we do that, we team up with other people who have signed up for Adopt a District. It's not just us, but in some of these districts, we certainly are the predominant group because we've put a big effort into organizing this. So I also just want to mention that 2 of the people on our steering committee are also outreaching to Franciscans, because there were a number of Franciscans that were on our first webinar, And they've chosen the bills that are most engaging for a Franciscan audience, having to do with agriculture and forestry. And they're preparing a webinar for that audience, specific audience, that would be a nationally promoted webinar. And then we've also done certain outreach to the Jesuits, okay, and the kind of network within the Jesuit community. And I think, yeah, it's been very gratifying to see how many people have actually signed up and gotten on board.
And the reason
It
we want
takes
to
work.
Nancy is just a flagship with Sarah Gronum in New York and shows the potential of what's going on here and how you can, you know, with some nitty gritty work, you can find folks to do this work with you. And this is really the full court press we're asking everyone to engage in at the moment. I'm just going to post some of the groups who have taken the pledge so you can see where we're going. All right.
Okay.
Go ahead, Lavona.
Yeah, so we're running behind. So I think we need to make some decision about whether we stay together here or it's 10 minutes to 5, and 5 o'clock was our end time. But we wanted to originally allow about 15 minutes for breakout groups. And so I'd kind of like to get the sense of the group about whether we should go into groups for about 10 minutes. We can go into small groups of about 3 people, and you can kind of process some of this and figure out kind of and identify some of those immediate next steps. And if there are any takeaways, you can put them in the chat when you come back, or any questions that you might have for us. So if you're able and willing, we'll go ahead and do that.
Welcome back, everyone. What a beautiful afternoon this was. I hope you all enjoyed it. We're at time, it seems like. I don't know if Lavona had any thoughts about, I just want to invite everyone to, you know, this is the moment we have to triple down. We will look back in time and see that we were part of making history that saved our planet. And so we have the first window before July 4th with the House. Everyone's lobbying their legislator. There'll be more focused conversations and ways to do that with our group. We're going to bring the in-depth conversation as to what a clean energy standard should be and all of that. So please follow our list to be included and come to those conversations. It's to make it simple. The Earth Bill makes it simple and just focuses on those technologies. So I think we're good to go running with that. Let's see, anything else? I don't know how to go over.
Maybe the letter will be posted at some point. We'll have some instructions and further information about how to use that and engage.
Yeah, and the letter's designed for folks who don't want to take a stand on the Earth Bill pledge and just want to really talk about the standards. And so it's really neutral in terms of legislation and just calls on the administration to put these requirements in law. And they're already looking at number 1, so we're on our way. And this is a real opportunity, and those don't come across very often on something like this. But the letter's a little more neutral. I put the draft, I thought we were finished. I put it in the chat. Maybe we weren't finished, so you might get a revised version. But if you sign the draft letter, we could list you as early signers, and that's very helpful to getting the ball rolling. So, and then you, that's it. Thank you. Lavona, you want to close this
Yeah,
out?
just wrap up. If you have any thoughts that coming out of the breakouts, just go ahead and put it in the chat, and we'll be definitely taking a look at that, and any questions or whatever. In terms of and I did put something in about that I hope you might be interested in, is the Friends National Committee on Legislation, FCNL, has a monthly training, advocacy training. It's how to organize, and in 30 minutes. This is a 30-minute training, and we're going to adapt this with them for us at a little later date, probably in early June. But in the meantime, they have two sessions coming up, one on May 18th and one on June 22nd. And I think you'll find it very helpful. Nancy has taken it, I've taken it. And then again, look for something that'll be customized probably in early June, where you'll have an opportunity to break into groups and actually practice some of the skills as well.
Oh, sorry, if I could just add one more thing. I forgot to mention our Monday night meetings. We're calling it the Earth Core. And these are really action-oriented meetings. We have 4 teams: an outreach team, Congress, marketing, direct action. Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion are running the direct action. There's a tentative date of July 2nd for an action. Pollution Independence Day is the theme, Pollution Independence Day. By July 2nd, we could be celebrating a victory in the House if we all get to work. And then we're going to turn our attention to the Senate. And if we haven't succeeded in the House, then we'll turn our attention to the Senate as well. Anyway, but we'd like to do something in June because in the middle of the House push. So anyway, Monday nights, if you're ready to get all in, we're going to be meeting every Monday night at 8 o'clock Eastern time. And so we welcome you all to that meeting. I just put the link to register for that in the chat.
Great, thank you very much. Well, thank you, all of you. We're going to kind of discern our working group about whether we'll be continuing to do monthly meetings or periodic meetings just to best meet your needs. And I'm actually thinking about doing a little survey to see where folks are. So if you want to stay around, Jeffrey is going to hold a little gathering of people. So thank you very much and look forward to seeing you at our next meeting.